In this video, we're going to talk about 7 major things that you might have missed in the New World roadmap, and we'll talk about what this means for the game going forward. There's some interesting stuff here. Now, unfortunately, we're going to start off with some negative news. The territory influence updates, I thought that was coming in the spring patch. The way that they had been speaking about that, I was pretty convinced it was going to be like now or actually before spring. However, when we look at the roadmap, you can quite clearly see that that's what it says in fall. Personally, I think that was delayed, and this is their way of telling us it was delayed. However, this means there's absolutely some huge news. In the expansion, they're very likely going to be keeping with the same territory control system. We're not going to get a massive overhaul that I had hoped for, or at least it would be very unlikely. Considering that patch is coming in fall and the expansion is also scheduled for fall, it sort of means they wouldn't put in that work if they were then going to rework it again. I thought that the territory influence system changes were basically a stopgap, something they were going to do in the interim. Well, it looks like that's not the case, and this is actually how they want it to be going forward. So anybody hoping for massive territory reworks in the expansion, well, you're going to be disappointed, a little bit like I was. And the next thing you probably did notice because it was on the dev update, but I think it's very important, and that is the fact that we are actually going to get 2 raids in summer. We're going to get the Sandworm Elite Trial, which I'm guessing is actually going to be 20 man because that's the number that they've thrown about when it comes to the maximum raid size group, but it could very easily be anywhere from 10 to 20, I think. Well, 10, 15 or 20 you would think would be likely, but the key thing there is that there's also going to be a seasonal trial, which is a 10-man raid. Now, will this season trial go away after the season is an interesting question. They sort of implied that it was, but honestly, I'll just be happy to have 2 raids. It sort of shows that the game is kicking on when it comes to the end game, and I'm very excited to see what that ends up being. They keep talking about how the Sandworm Elite Trial should be like the most difficult content. Obviously, it should be the hardest PvE content, but I don't necessarily think they should lock people out of it like your average players. If your gear score 625 and you have reasonable skills, then you should be able to play it. I hope there's no like ward in it. I hope it's not like Angry Earth or Beastbane or something like that. I hope you actually can just go in and outskill it. I hope there's no necessarily like scaling involved, but we'll see what happens when we actually get it. On the back of the raids, there's something very interesting in summer. There is going to be a new heart rune, but there's actually going to be no expedition. Now, this will be the first time that we have a new heart rune without it being tied to one of the 5-man expeditions. The very likely outcome from this is that it's either going to come from the Sandworm Elite Trial, or perhaps more interestingly, the seasonal trial. I don't think it'll be the seasonal trial, because if it is actually seasonal and it's going to go away, then that means that you won't be able to get it in future, and that just feels really awkward. So I can see this being behind the Sandworm Elite Trial, and if that actually is the hardest difficulty in the game, then you would expect the heart rune to be maybe one of the best. We will have to wait and see. Either way, this suggests that we are going to be getting new heart runes from different methods other than expeditions. Yes, it might be raids, but it's still interesting in my mind. And then the next thing is one that I've seen a few different opinions on now, and that is in the expansion, it says a zone transformed. Now, I'll tell you, I don't think that that's a slight rework to a zone like we've seen with Monarch's Bluff and Everfall, where the towns were changed and some of the landscape was changed, but it was very minor in theory, right? And in Season 1, apparently we are going to get changes to Brightwood and Weaver's Fen, so we'll see what they are as well. But a zone transform suggests something a little bit bigger. Some people are suggesting it will be a complete rework to First Light, and I think that might be on the cards as well. But I think we're going to see some bigger changes when it comes to all of the zones, partly because we're going to get mounts, which we're going to talk about in a minute, and partly because this is an expansion, right? This is where you're probably going to charge people for this, although that's actually not been confirmed. You want this to be, hey, we're doing something major. So if they are going to rework a zone, it will be a major rework to that zone. And I think they actually might do it to a couple of zones. And even though they don't have it on here, I think that they will actually do some new zones. Maybe 1 to 3, somewhere between there, I think. Okay, I just mentioned mounts. Let's move on to some details about the expansion that you may not have noticed. Yes, mounts are coming this year. As we saw, I've just made a video talking about how there is actually a riding skill in the game as well, a riding profession. I think that ties in a little bit with a zone transformed, because I personally don't think we need mounts when you have so many travel shrines and it costs so little. So maybe they're going to rework how you move across the map. That'll be super interesting. One sad thing that a lot of people might notice is that it does actually only say we are scheduled for 1 weapon. That weapon is likely a focus-based weapon. I'm pretty sure the dev said that the next weapon would be a focus-based weapon. So we could imagine something like the Celestial Gauntlet or something like that. That does mean that we're not going to have daggers or dual wielding daggers or anything like that. However, I would say that this expansion may not be fully comprehensive, right? As with the zones, and maybe we're going to get new zones, we may end up with more than 1 new weapon, and an expansion would be an absolutely perfect time for them to drop 2 weapons, maybe even 3. One little thing that you may not find that interesting in Season 3 there is actually no scheduled story change. Now that's very, very likely because in the expansion we're going to get a whole new story. I would be surprised though if there are no story elements provided in Season 3 that actually sort of lead into the expansion. Personally, I think that would make a lot of sense, so I think there will be, but it's interesting that they didn't list it here. And then a big one on the expansion, which you probably did notice because it is actually going to be very important, and that is the fact that in the expansion we are going to get a gear score increase. Now what's interesting here is that they just said gear score increase, they don't say level increase. So if that's going to be the case, the key question is, can you use your old gear or are we going to get new gear? And what is the gear score that we're actually going to go to? The minimum it could possibly go to, right, is 650, and the maximum I think will be 700. Somewhere between there is what we'll end up with. I don't really know exactly what or how. I mean, technically we could end up at 725 because maybe it goes to 700 and then you upgrade with Umbral Shards. That would sort of make sense. But I just think it's very interesting that there's a gear score increase but no level increase. So that might mean that the same gear you have now is actually usable. For some people that would be a really good thing. For others who might want a reset, a little bit like a fresh start, then that maybe isn't a good thing. Obviously, we'll see more details in the future. My personal expectation is that we'll probably get a trailer around the Summer Games Expo. Unless there's any kind of special event that happens between now and then, I'm pretty much sure we'll get a trailer then. You know, Jeff Keighley will be there and they'll be like, here's a new expansion for New World. I'm still pretty convinced that the trailer will feature somebody like swimming to shore, and they'll be like, swimming in the game. And then somebody will be riding along on a mount, and they'll be like, mounts in the game. Not like the EA, but you get the gist. And then the next thing I want to talk about is actually something that World of Warcraft players might be familiar with. It is the idea that we might be getting borrowed power. Now, I'm not 100% sure about this. It is actually speculation on my part. But when it comes to Season 4, which we can expect in winter, this is actually after the expansion, there is going to be something called a seasonal trinket. This obviously seems like it's going to be somewhat temporary. It's how we're going to interact with the seasonal mutations. I think that's what they said in the dev update, but it sounds like it's going to be something that you'll equip that will probably give you temporary power. Now, it might not be temporary. Maybe you'll keep this forever and a day, right? Maybe you just keep it going forward. However, it might literally be something similar to World of Warcraft where they have like borrowed power systems. Borrowed power effectively meaning you keep it for that expansion and then you lose it and there's something else that replaces it. That may or may not be the case, so I don't want to like speculate too much. This is actually coming at the end of the year. But if you call something a seasonal trinket, then in my mind that suggests it's possibly going to go away. Overall, I'm actually really happy with the roadmap. There's a couple of things that I wish would come before the expansion. For example, cross-world arenas and expeditions. I wish that that was actually before the expansion, but okay. I know that they mentioned a new arena map as well. I've no idea at what point that's coming on this time frame. And I am a little bit sad that the PvP influence changes is not happening sooner, because people want some PvP content, of which there still is very little of on this roadmap. And then I'm also worried that not only are they not doing it sooner, it also means that we're going to keep this system in an expansion, which means that we're going to have the territory system, which means we're going to have massive gold issues and stuff like that. I think hopefully there's some changes there that they've just not told us about. But yeah, some interesting stuff on this roadmap overall. Is there anything on here that you think I missed? Do let me know in the comments below. If you want to support me and help me try and become like a full-time content creator, then becoming a YouTube member or a Patreon truly is the best way. On Patreon, you can actually like sign up for like $1. I don't have that option on a YouTube member because it's actually just a little bit awkward. However, you can also come and follow me on Twitch. I think I'm going to be streaming today. I might even be streaming while this video is live. Come and check me out and hit that follow button. What you should definitely do though is have a most beautiful day. Like and subscribe. Goodbye.